How would you describe how U.com is different than the ChatGPT, Gemini, and the other LLM chat interfaces?
We actually focus on getting accurate answers, and then not just over public data, but also over company internal data that sets us apart.
The actual underlying model is reasoning just fine, but it just didn't get some of the relevant sources. So it can't know. That's the kind of the fundamental problem with LLMs once they stop training.
So this is some of that idea that, Perplexity and others might be good at like fast facts, but you're going a little slow. So your end user can go fast and just be able to take that info and move forward with confidence.
I mean, in many ways, like having a quick answer of what's the weather tomorrow or what's the score of the game isn't really going to make people want to switch from Google, because you can already get that answer within 1 second. So when you'd have to spend days doing work and you get that now in minutes or hours, like that's where people say, wow, like U.com is a game changer for my organization. I think there are always areas of deep expertise that are less attractive, and in a weird way, the less attractive they are, the fewer people will compete with you in them. So there's a lot more low-hanging fruit still in real estate, insurance brokerage than in movie making and the music industry.
Right.
I probably have seen several hundreds of AI psychologists at this point.
What are your thoughts on AGI, and what role do you see U.com playing in that? Welcome to the Agentic Podcast, where we dive deep with the pioneer AI founders reimagining business and the investors betting on them. We bring you the war stories, insights, and perspectives you won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, George Bandarian, the general partner of Untapped Ventures, a VC fund that invests in early-stage AI startups. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to the Agentic Podcast. I'm your host, George Bandarian, and today we have two very special guests with us. They are the co-founders of U.com, one of the most innovative AI startups based in the Bay. It started as a search engine alternative and has really evolved into a productivity engine, and we'll hear from the two co-founders on where it's at today and where it's going. The two co-founders are Richard Socher and Bryan McCann. Richard is the CEO and co-founder. He's a renowned AI researcher, entrepreneur, technologist. He previously built a company, MetaMind, that was acquired by Salesforce. He was chief scientist at Salesforce, where he led advancements in natural language processing and conversational AI. Prior to all that, he has a PhD in computer science from Stanford, where he studied under the well-known Chris Manning and pioneered early work in deep learning for NLP. And Bryan McCann is co-founder and CTO, a seasoned AI scientist with deep roots in NLP, large language models, and controllable text generation, having co-authored the influential paper on that topic around contextual word vectors, which was the precursor to BERT, and later co-developed Control, one of the first controllable generative transformers. He also was in research at Salesforce and Stanford, where his focus included multitask learning, controllable generation, and protein sequence modeling, and the two of them left a few years ago to start U.com. It'll be really interesting to dig in and understand the origin story and what led to the founding of U.com. Welcome to the show, guys. How did you guys meet? I'm guessing it was at Salesforce, although I'm not sure if maybe you were together prior to the sale of your company, Richard, to Salesforce. So maybe kind of tell us about how you guys met and ultimately how your relationship evolved. I think young founders are very interested in learning from successful founders, especially multi-exit experienced founders like yourself, Richard and Bryan. So would love to kind of peel that back and learn a little bit about how you all met and how we got to where we're at today.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. So high level, we met at Stanford. Actually, I was a PhD student. Bryan was an undergrad, and we started working together one summer during Stanford. And then Bryan did his master's in computer science. I did MetaMind, and then after the acquisition of MetaMind, Bryan joined the research team at Salesforce. There's actually technically only folks with a PhD, but Bryan was brilliant and didn't need a PhD to do cutting edge research right away. And so we started working together, and for several years, I had this crazy idea to try to just unify all of natural language processing with one model and just ask that model different questions and prompt it to give you different answers. And most people I pitched this idea to had told me like, Richard, that's just too hard. Like, also, I want to publish a little paper every quarter, and this seems like for a quarter, I'll just have to do pre-processing of all these different data sets and so on, and all these different communities and how they evaluate success in translation and summarization and traditional question answering and a sentiment analysis and you name it. But Bryan actually saw that that vision and also wanted to work on really impactful things, and then he made this idea his own and really crushed it. And a year later, we published DECA NLP together in 2018, and that paper was eventually cited by the first GPT papers from OpenAI and others as the first one to have that general purpose idea. To have a single model. In fact, I now hear people say, "Oh, that's so obvious. It doesn't even deserve to have someone who invented prompt engineering." But it was also so unobvious that the paper got rejected multiple times at different conferences because it was just so out there. And through some of those ups and downs, you also get to know someone really well. And I was really fortunate to have been able to work with a lot of really smart people at Stanford and invested in many incredible students and interns and employees and co-PhD students and so on. And Bryan was the smartest of them all, and also had the right sort of balance of just not giving up and grinding hard and working hard into different problems. And so when we kind of sat on the prompt engineering paper for 2 years, hoping that we'll get better answers from the world, but the world, Google, didn't really want to give people better answers, and so we said, well, someone's got to do it. And so I asked Bryan if he wants to co-found it. I was very happy that he said yes. And yeah, Bryan, do you have anything to add to that story?
And what timing was that? So when he said yes?
2020 is when we started U.com.
2020, got it.
Yeah, and I think that it's always fun to hear from the different perspectives too, because I was coming out of this kind of background in philosophy and philosophy of language. I was really interested in meaning and making machines that could make meaning, which I don't know that we ever really did, but they're very much more functional now. And I remember, going to the computer science lab at Stanford, and there was really only one person at the time that was, working on neural networks for NLP, deep learning for NLP. And when I saw that work, it was just like, yeah, this is the stuff, and it was Richard's work. He was already deep into many papers of showing, the path and the future for, I think, a lot of people over the following decade or so now. So I was lucky to, I guess, run into him back then. And even at that time, Richard mentioned his vision for a unified model for natural language processing. And I remember him also just being obsessed with search and what search could be, not just a search box tied to 10 blue links the way Google was, but could it really give you answers? Could it give you almost like infinite information, like a stream of information, so that we're still not doing some of that yet to some extent. I think people are still trying to capture that form of both this deep research, but also kind of proactive search on your behalf. And all the seeds of the future seem to be there already in that summer when I was talking with him. So it was a easy choice for me when I had the opportunity to go to Salesforce and try to prove myself there. And then it was another easy decision as the world was changing and we saw the inflection point coming, like the real opportunity. Because back at the start, the ideas were there, but we didn't know how to make it work, and the models weren't ready. But as 2020 was rolling around, it seemed like, yeah, we should get out in the wild. We got to experiment and see what's going to happen, because it's going to be technology, it's going to be search, it's probably going to be the economy, like everything was going to change. And so it has.
So obviously that was before the ChatGPT moment in November 2022, but still there was OpenAI was doing a lot of work. There was a lot of papers, things were being built. The ChatGPT interface wasn't released to the public. So I guess what was that initial from the 2020, as you mentioned, to the ChatGPT moment like for the that infancy of the company? You must have gone through some early like product market fit journey evolution from
Yeah.
there to here, right?
Yeah, for the first year, we essentially built the foundations of search for us, so that we could, be somewhat recognizable as a product in that space. And we had baked in more and more AI over the following year after we launched. We'd launch some generative AI writing assistants, called it You Write. We had coding assistants, You Code. Um, and the interface at the time was more traditional search-like. And depending on the query, if it was relevant, we would bring up these language models as assistants for you, image generation as well. It was when ChatGPT came around and kind of flipped that into the conversational interface that we very quickly did the same and connected those. Actually, the way that we did it under the hood, we basically took our writing assistant and just put it on the front page all the time and let it see the search sources. So that was how we were able to, from essentially the launch of ChatGPT to the launch of UChat, do it in a couple of weeks and have something ready to go.
Nice. So that's exciting. And so you went from there, grew a great consumer audience, built the product, got lots of learning and iteration, improved the product, and then at some point uh, started to really focus on B2B and the enterprise. And that led to now with Ari, which is a very much an enterprise product that, small to large businesses can use to improve their research across the board, and in some areas really be able to derive additional revenue and or reduce expenses by using it. And so that kind of brings us up to speed here in April, May 2025. So you just launched ARI, which you call Ari. And so we just had a chance to check it out, me and my team, and it looks pretty exciting. So maybe you could tell us about this full-blown research agent for enterprises. What is it, and how exactly is it changing the game?
Ari is essentially the second version of our deep research agent that will go much beyond any other research agent out there. It'll go deeper. It'll write you reports. It'll create beautiful artifacts like PDFs that you can actually share with and soon also edit and actually build work products that aren't just your quick, trivial answer. We found that really Google is pretty good when it comes to asking like, what's the score of the game? What's the weather tomorrow? Who's the president of France? There's not much you can do there to actually be 10x better. But the deeper the work goes, the longer the reports have to be, the more you incorporate your own company internal data with hundreds of different websites, the more you really start to build useful answers for enterprises.
Yeah, that's exciting. Now, I'm obviously very familiar with you.com, and for the listeners that aren't, uh, how would you describe how you.com is different than the ChatGPT, Gemini, and the other LLM chat interfaces, as well as how is it different from the other similar players like Perplexity and others? So help us understand what is you.com, so and where people should really be using it in light of this RE enhancements.
So U.com is essentially where you see the future on all these other platforms. These days you have at most a 3 to 12 month window when you build something novel, and then many other folks will copy it. And we have the patents and everything to back up those statements and launch dates. But the main difference, surprisingly, is still the accuracy. A lot of folks spend a lot of resources on marketing to consumers and pretending to be the next Google, or just Google doing its thing. We actually focus on getting accurate answers, and then not just over public data, but also over company internal data in a trusted fashion. So those are the main differences. It's the accuracy, it's the depth, it's the connectivity between your internal customer data and your just general external web data that sets us apart. And then building also custom workflow agents on top of all of that you can share within your organization. So we're not pretending to be the next Google or the current Google, but we're just helping companies actually be more productive. And we believe that even the various startups that try to claim to be the next Google, they're all gonna likely fail at this because Google isn't slowing down either. And they're probably going to move and follow us into the enterprise once they realize they cannot quite break the monopoly that is Google.
That makes sense. So if we think about that, one of the things that's happening in the enterprise, Bryan, is the move to agentic. And so where are you guys at with, I guess, how do you define your agents? Do I go in and set up each agent? Are you guys working, or do you have the ability to make it agentic and string together a workflow process? And ultimately, I guess, how are you contributing to getting us to AGI? But I guess, why don't we take it one question at a time?
Yeah, with our custom agents, it really builds off of everything else that comes with the platform these days, that is you.com. So as Richard mentioned before, we have Ari, and that's our flagship agent that can do all of this deep research for you, decide when to make additional queries to a search engine, pull in more results, and go really, really deep on citing those sources so that you have very transparent research processes. But then on top of that, you can build all sorts of agents that can start to automate the really repetitive parts of your job or whatever you're working on. So, everything from headline generation to proofreading, some go-to-market plans, product specs. These are things that people are starting to outsource to agents on you.com. And it benefits from many times using the public data to be as up-to-date as possible, but then capitalizing on the unique aspect of your company's private data to do things in a way that a GPT out of the box can't do, or some of these other systems can't do, without being able to tap into what is proprietary about your company. Unless you're spending a lot of time, training up those agents yourself, whereas you.com, you can get this full solution that uses something like Ari for all the research, but then becomes a little bit more focused for use cases based on your data. And then in many cases, we can apply those to a company's use case as an API or in the u.com interface itself. It's very flexible, but very powerful.
Gotcha. So I know you're really excited about Ari. What have been some of the most impressive real world use cases that you've seen so far with your early customers using that?
Well, one of my favorite use cases was actually before we had even decided to call it Ari, having a conversation with it about and describing to Ari what it was, that it was this deep research agent that had access to all these sources. And it provided a really nice research report for us in the early days of this competitive landscape, wrote its own product specs to some degree, and helped us develop some of the go-to-market plans. So it's this research report generating agent that a lot of people use for market research, or I use a lot every time I'm going into a conversation with a potential customer or partner to understand that market, to understand their recent product launches, to understand as much as I can and become an expert as quickly as possible for them. But then you can use it for all of these other like in-depth use cases around product building. And these days, it's very popular for consulting. Any sort of consulting or strategic decisions or strategy or advice you're giving to clients, it's almost indispensable to have this kind of deep research at your fingertips.
Got it. And yeah, it's a fine line, right? Because when we call it research. It's a very broad and it applies to everybody. But unless you can clearly articulate your edge in that, it sounds like something that all of the platforms do, right? I can do research on and even deep research on Gemini, Claude, OpenAI, and all that. So, how have you guys navigated if you're trying to own that and be the best at that? How have you guys navigated articulating and coining what you own in that so people understand like, hey, we've decided this, like we do this better than everyone, and this is what this is and how it's different than just going in and using somebody else's research or deep research tool. Or is that still a work in progress?
I can take a crack at that one. Yeah. So with Ari, what we started with was the angle on comprehensiveness. So when Ari came out, and even to this day, it's often gathering many, many more sources than any of the other deep research competitors. And the idea here is that even though we have depth in a lot of these offerings, you really want to be able to capture as much breadth as possible too. If you're bringing in, 10, 20 sources, that might be okay, as long as they're the absolute best perfect sources and they somehow capture everything that the internet is talking about in relation to whatever topic you're researching. But Ari will bring in 300, 400, sometimes 500 sources, read all of those live, and then pinpoint the exact sentences, inside those sources that are the most important for what it's reporting to you. And that level of breadth is like a very important foundation, I think, for a lot of agents moving forward too. It's almost like, how could you really trust an AI system to be making really important decisions for you in financial markets or with your clients if potentially it's missing some of the information? Maybe the actual underlying model is reasoning just fine, but it just didn't get some of the relevant sources. So it can't know. It's the kind of the fundamental problem with LLMs once they stop training. So emphasizing that breadth on top of the depth is where Ari is very special. And then getting back into people's normal workflows, generating PDFs, slides, making it as easy as possible to distribute that information, Ari shines there as well.
Got it. So this is some of that idea that, Perplexity and others might be good at like fast facts, but you guys are really investing in, the concept that I call like going slow to go fast, right? It's almost like you're going a little slow so your end user can go fast and just be able to take that info and move forward with confidence. So it might take me a little longer if I'm doing an RE search versus somebody else's, but at least I know that I'm rest assured that I have the most comprehensive and the best ultimate deliverable coming out of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, like having a quick answer of what's the weather tomorrow or what's the score of the game isn't really going to make people want to switch from Google, because you can already get that answer within 1 second on Google. So when you'd have to spend days doing work and you get that now in minutes or hours, like that's where people say, wow, like U.com is a game changer for my organization. We have quotes now from journalists, from insurance companies, from hedge funds, from banking, banks, who tell us exactly that. And some of them we've made public and shared with the world, of course, with agreements of those organizations. And that's very powerful to see. And that's honestly what I love to see also, is like actually helping people be more productive with AI.
And so then by that same token, does it use the new, I saw you guys have the new auto feature, which, solves one of the problems where, I don't know which of the engines to pick. You guys have all the engines, open source and not, and the APIs, and you are always updating to the latest one, but it's like, I don't know which one I should use for this request. And so you solve that problem for users by just, letting the system decide. But in the case of Ari, so is it kind of using the deep research of multiple models and then putting that together into the main answer? Is that kind of part of the benefit of your solution?
Yeah, with Ari, there is probably a dozen or so models actually underneath the hood doing all sorts of things to ensure the citations are as accurate as possible, make sure we've actually collected as many sources as we possibly can that are relevant for a topic, generating more topics. And those models themselves, some of them are based off of open source models. Some of them are based off of foundation models from other providers. All of them are put through our own testing frameworks and fine-tuning frameworks with our own training sets and evaluation loops. But R is really a collection of models underneath the hood. And the auto feature that you're talking about that just came out as well is trading off not just between different models, but between the idea of doing a deep search versus a shallow search at all as well. Because yeah, you can get caught up trying to think about which models best for which use cases, and we want to handle that for you. We also want to be able to switch into a deeper processing mode when it could be helpful without you necessarily needing to think about that decision too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, no surprises. Let's continue with this timeline and, are you guys planning on adding workflows and agentic and AGI? We never touched on that. So yeah, take us from here on out for the next few years, maybe the next 5, 10 years. And what does this look like for you guys if you.com is as successful as you hope and envision it to be?
Yeah, we're moving deeper and deeper into workflows for companies, insurance companies, publishers, healthcare companies, hedge funds, and so on. And we love seeing that productivity increase and that knowledge work being more and more automated. I think we're moving from answers more and more to agents. So helping people actually create workflows and become managers of AI. And so we're leaning into that. We have training also. So there's role-specific training SKUs that come with you.com, so you can actually up-level all your employees. Because it turns out if you've been an IC for many years, it's not that intuitive to now just manage agents and delegate work in unambiguous ways to your agents and explain to them how to do that work. Right now, we're mostly focused on knowledge agents. I think in the next couple of quarters, you'll see more and more action agents too. There's still no really good action agent that will write emails for you and really know all the subtleties of doing that well. But that will happen also in the coming quarters. And yeah, we're just focused on revenue. Our revenue increased massively over the last few quarters. And we're just very excited to, see if we can break into another order of magnitude more revenue this year, and eventually really become a partner to help companies on the path towards AGI. I think we kind of summarize it with 3 things: answers, agents, AGI. And that AGI path isn't just going to come by like throwing it over the fence, but you really have to bring organizations along with them. And that's why we offer all the different LLMs out there. So you don't have to worry about all the change management and zero data retention and privacy preserving features and so on, but you just partner with you.com and then you're future-proofing your organization. And you have certain requirements. We go deeper with our customers than just like, here's a out of the box tool. We'll actually go and help them with their data sets, with custom integrations, so that the AI is knowledgeable about the organization.
Yeah, I was going to ask you guys about that. I mean, it's staggering for me because I still do keynotes. I know you and I, Richard, met a couple of years ago when we were both doing a keynote at Caltech. We were back to back. That's how we met. We became friends. Obviously, we had the opportunity to invest and jump onto your journey, or the you journey, your journey. But I continue to do that, as I'm sure you do too. And I'm just surprised at 2 things. One is just the level of enterprise lack of adoption of AI, as much as I would expect by this point in April 2025. And part of it is I see that when people try, there are the failed projects now, but then there's also the burnout, and there is the AI overwhelm. And so like all these things are happening. And just lately in the last week, I've seen OpenAI release a paper, which is like a kind of a white paper on how to implement agents, and Google had something, and now OpenAI and Google have white papers, webinars. So it's interesting that AI is reaching this new, and you mentioned it yourself that you guys have some of these assets. So it's interesting how the industry is moving, maybe in the crossing the chasm from like the super early adopters to, in order to bring the mass market, there's a lot of education necessary. So maybe that's just part of it. But I guess what are your thoughts, and what are you guys seeing out in the field on, why is it the case that, like, our LPs, we have 100 LPs. Most of them own large companies, venture and non-venture backed. Um, and they're all still trying to figure it out. Some are ahead of others, but they're all really just trying to figure it out. And I would have expected that, that a much higher percentage would have been using AI across the board, or certainly in key areas. Um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
There are a few things. I think many people spend some time trying to do as much of it as possible in-house. Some people are doing that and they learn fairly quickly, some more quickly than others, that the devil is often in the details with some of these implementations. So it has been some of my favorite customers over the last year and a half that have spent 5, 10 engineers building a ChatGPT-like interface, setting up RAG, setting up the vector database, and a couple of queries work. So you can definitely get some demoable queries out of it, but it's really not robust enough or broadly applicable enough to get the kind of adoption you'd hope for. So, you're talking like low single digit percentage of adoption rather than 80% of the company using what they built. And, that's partially because it's just quite difficult to get the details right and to make it broadly applicable. It's also because the technology is still moving very quickly. And the capabilities of what are possible are in many ways outpacing the ability of people to just get set up with the basics. The basics being not just that RAG setup, but wrangling the most valuable data for that use case, understanding what their postures are going to be from a security and privacy perspective, depending on their products. All of these questions go into what they're going to do and their strategy. And even though there's often a huge impetus and almost a mandate to do something, that something is very unclear, especially when everybody is looking around at everybody else saying, how is what we're going to do how will it be different from them? So there's that extra consideration. And then on top of all of that, as you mentioned, individual employees in a company being maybe afraid to some extent, a little fearful, or just confused or feeling like this not for them or that they're going to be replaced. There's a lot of human factors that prevent adoption, and the raw tech and the kind of shininess of it isn't really enough to punch through that initial barrier either. You have to have a bit of a human touch, as Richard was talking about before.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Bryan. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm experiencing it a little bit myself too, as the end user. Richard, you and I had a chat, sharing with you how I have a vision of, creating some kind of a agentic investment process, right? Where a founder can hit my website and multimodal, submit a deck, data room, interact, be asked questions, video, sentiment analysis, all that stuff, and then have the AI reach an investment decision over time once we've done the evals and we're comfortable and we've fine-tuned it and all that good stuff. So I know it's possible. I know there are a lot of tools. I have people that want to work with us, PhDs that want to work and build it. But it's a little overwhelming because do I buy or build? Which one of these agentic systems do I use? The developers want to just build it, the whole thing in-house, not use any of the tools. So even as someone that I would say is, more experienced, there's certainly not a single path, but there's not like an easy button. And me having gone through this right now, and experiencing this pain point, you know, gives me greater appreciation for what I think enterprises are going through. That it's, I I know the technical capabilities are there. I just want a solution I could just pick it up, subscribe to it, tell them what my screening criteria is, tell them what my selection criteria is, have it go through, do a few, do 10, let me check it, let me say why I got it right, why I got it wrong, and put it into like production. Like it should be that easy, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, the more complex workflows you automate, the longer it takes you to train that AI to do it for you. But I do think in the next few years, most forward-looking organization will use tools that when you use them get smarter. And when you have to repeat a similar workflow more than 10, 20 times, you'd be like, wait, why hasn't AI picked up this workflow yet and has just given me a suggestion to click yes to? Like,
Mm,
already
mm.
audit that. I've already done that in the software, right? And that's when I think a lot of different enterprise workflow tools will really shift.
Yeah, I like that because, in operations management, the whole rule is like if there's anything that you're gonna do more than a couple times, then there should be an SOP around that, right? So as a manager, as a leader, as a founder, if you do something a few times and you know you're gonna keep doing it, just create that SOP and then you could give that to someone else. But now in an AI first mindset, what you're saying is if we know that there is something that we're going to do a bunch of times, then there should be an AI that's learning it and being able to take it on from us, right? Either assist in the process in a co-pilot capacity or take it over eventually in a pilot capacity, right? Um, okay, so really interesting stuff. So we were talking a little bit about the future and so moving from answers to agents to AGI. Yeah, what are your thoughts on AGI, guys? Are we already there? How do you define it? What do you think it'll be like when we get there, if we're not already there? And what role do you see U.com playing in that?
Yeah, I would love to hear from Bryan too, but high level, indeed, depending on how you define it, we're already there. In fact, when we built the first DECA NLP model and you could you could ask it any question and get an answer in natural language, you could argue, yeah, wow, that was a pretty general purpose intelligent system. But then, of course, we keep moving that bar on how general, and at this point, more and more of us are separating super intelligence also from general intelligence, and just to show like, yeah, you can go beyond a bunch of different human skills and go into being even better than people on some skills, which requires often simulations, because if you only train on human data, it's hard to be above superhuman. If we're doing machine translation and we give it a bunch of human data, well, the AI is not going to translate that much better than those humans. If we give it a bunch of human IQ tests, then the AI will have a hard time like being even superhuman in those IQ tests. And so like eventually realize there shouldn't even be this kind of test. There should be an even harder test that humans can't come off because we're not intelligent enough. So there's a lot of space still
That's how it learned, right? I mean, that's how it learned how to win at Go and even chess is not studying the moves that humans do. Eventually, initially that's what it did, but when it was given the opportunity to start from a blank slate, is when it was able to come up with its own moves that humans have never done, and,
exactly.
and
Everything you
so
can simulate, AI can solve. But we can't simulate biology yet. We can't simulate a cell perfectly yet. We can't simulate organs, humans, and complex systems. And so, but that will happen as AI gets better, as simulations get better, as computers get faster, as quantum computers may eventually have real breakthroughs and can be scaled up. That's when we can have like more and more super intelligence. So I'm really excited about it. I hope U.com will play its part in that and get humanity to that state, because it is truly incredible what happens when technology scales massively into a field of the human condition, and you end up in a state where a billionaire and a middle-class teenager will use the same iPhone every day for hours, right? And so you can look at like, what are all the other goods and services that are bottlenecked on intelligence? And you can realize like, well, we'll all have personal assistants, personal tutors for our kids, personal healthcare teams for longevity and health, and so on. So I'm really excited for that, and AGI will unlock a lot of those use cases. And then there's sort of very pragmatic definitions of just, if we automate 80% of the workflows of 80% of the digitized jobs, which is, a couple of $1 trillion worth of GDP, then I think we can actually get there in the next few years. But then you'll see the same thing you see with most other technologies, which is the future is already here, but not equally distributed. Anyway, I love the future. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I love it too. So those are all, and I agree with you. I'm very optimistic about the future and look at what's happening. So if we go more into the short term, what do you guys see happening in the next year, let's call it, that most people, even maybe some founders, AI founders and VCs, don't really see yet?
One of the ideas that I think Richard and I have put forth for the last few years and seems to be true is that the quicker the validation and feedback loop you can have for these systems, the more likely they are to improve very quickly, and then more likely that they're going to automate a lot of workflows more quickly. So yeah, coming to the short term and coming to some of those more like pragmatic years, as Richard was talking about, it seems like coding and software engineering is changing very, very quickly now, in part because that feedback loop is there and the validation cycles are so quick. The code either works or it doesn't. And that's at the level of, does it even compile or not? Before, does it actually do what you want in the application? So that level of feedback is super helpful for rapid iteration. It seems clear that in the next couple of years, software engineering is just going to continue to change dramatically. Richard often says, we're all just going to be managing AI, and that's probably true of these AI engineers as well. And then I think there's going to be a combination, kind of jumping off of Richard's simulation point as well. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a need, more or less, to start automating those feedback loops in different areas as much as possible. Like there's so many, you mentioned operations earlier, there's so much in the operation running of companies, economies, scientific laboratories for biology and experiments that I think we could sit here and say that there's no theoretical reason why that stuff couldn't be automated, but the process just isn't there for collecting the data, validating it quickly. There's too much like human feedback that's needed in the loop right now. So to a large degree, clever ideas on quickly validating whether an AI is successful or not might be even more key at this point, where the holy grail in any domain there is a full simulation of the state space, and you can just play it all out. But in the absence of that, maybe on the way, trying to build up these deciders that help us get the AIs better in incremental steps.
That's cool. I like that.
I'm super excited for AI for science. Yeah.
I'm really excited about that as well. I think it's, my friend Peter Diamandis calls it the longevity escape velocity, him and Ray Kurzweil. And it's really, just don't do anything stupid, stay alive. And in the next 10 years, we'll figure out a lot of these diseases and conditions that we've been struggling with for so many years. And we've had, we've lost so many lives to, like cancer and others. So I'm very hopeful about that. Let's spend the last few minutes maybe talking about helpful advice, lessons learned for AI founders, the next generation of founders that might be at your alma maters at Stanford or MIT or wherever the case might be. There is what happens once you start, and I'm sure you guys have probably some good go-to lessons learned and kind of advice, especially Richard, you're also an investor as well. But maybe before we get to the how to be a successful founder, I think the field is moving so fast. So let's just talk about like what to build or what problem space. And, I guess putting on your founder, investor, industry expert hats, both of you guys, what do you think, like, where do you think we're at? If somebody was graduating Stanford and starting something later this year or in 2026, with the field moving so fast, like my personal opinion is, AI, the vertical AI, horizontal AI came and went, vertical AI came and went. All of those sectors are full. And vertical, horizontal, vertical, agentic got filled up pretty quickly. And again, we're talking about in the pre-seed seed, early stages. Agentic horizontal, agentic vertical got filled up pretty quickly. So we're already kind of looking at what's next, whether that's, you know, BCI, robotics, quantum, and not to say that those are completely nascent. There's many, many companies in those areas as well. Uh, but it's just interesting to see how 60% of all venture funding went to AI startups in Q1. It seems like, and maybe there's some bias that I have, but it seems like all the bright minds are focused on AI um, startups. So there's a lot of quantity and there's a lot of activity, and that also makes it a little harder. You can't just do another Me Too kind of AI solution. So those are some of my thoughts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what your advice would be if you're teaching a class at Stanford or whatever, you're coming across a new founder that's in that open ideation phase. I'm not looking for a specific startup to create, but kind of general, themes and how the market's evolving and where you see the opportunity spaces opening up over the next 12 months.
So high level, indeed, everything purely digital, the low-hanging fruits are going to get picked off really quickly. So you better have a very, very deep niche that you're focused on, or you have a lot of resources to be able to compete in that. And you have to be ready for just a constant, very fast pace. Whenever you do something somewhat successfully, people will copy you in 3 to 12 months. Now, not having to do the iterations, but just copying the thing and building directly the right solution. I think as AI software development gets faster and faster, and AI will write more and more software for you, showing it how to do something is essentially training data for the AI, and so someone will be able to copy it very, very quickly. So you have to be in for that ride. I think there are always areas of deep expertise that are less attractive, and in a weird way, the less attractive they are, the fewer people will compete with you in them. So there's a lot more low-hanging fruit still in real estate, insurance brokerage than in movie making and like music, like the music industry,
Right.
or general chatbots, or like I probably have seen several hundreds of AI psychologists at this point, and like, but revenue cycle management still has like more. Now there are quite a few companies that do revenue cycle management at this point. In fact, it seems unfortunately case that a lot of successful healthcare startups end up just in that. But like, there's a lot there. Then I think the deeper in tech you go, the more you can actually rely on a technical moat. So if you do, drug development, you create new kinds of compounds, new materials, and things like that. That's where you can actually rely on technology modes rather than the standard things like go to market and so on. In many ways, we're in a phase where mobile apps were when Instagram started to kind of break out. There are like 100 other photo sharing apps, and just have to go back to like standard startup building skills like sales, distribution, marketing, brand, and to some degree technology. But certainly we've seen in our space also folks that have done better in marketing to a degree where it's almost lying, had worse technology, but it worked out pretty well for them. And so you have to just go back to the basics in some ways of startup building if you want to compete in these very competitive spaces.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And then I guess, so let's say they pick something good. Maybe it's not as sexy of a space or whatever it is. It's a good one. And now they're off and running. Is there any one key piece of advice that you think you've learned in your journeys that you would want to impart on any listeners early in their process?
Find a good co-founder. Find someone who doesn't easily give up. Who actually has the grit and determination and hard work ethic to go the distance. If you look at most companies like that were started in the 2000s, there's a lot of them that died, and then there are a few that just kind of kept going, right? And eventually they really grew into massive businesses. You look at their stocks, and there's some like 3, 4, 5 years where the stock was basically flat. But eventually, you iterate, and you got to, keep iterating and improve your go-to-market, improve your sales, improve your distribution and your funnel and everything. And then you succeed. And I think in some ways, AI is speeding all of it up, but some of those fundamentals continue to be relevant. In fact, the one thing that AI cannot increase and speed up massively is the amount of human attention that is there. And so, you have to keep fighting for that.
You mean like the focus of the co-founders and the early team? Is that what you mean by human attention?
That, but also just the users, I will change so many things, but it cannot really, it will improve massively the productivity of different industries, the outputs of, the amount of illustrations and art and translations we get. It used to be that if you want to travel the world and be able to communicate with others, you'd have to be very, very wealthy and have a personal translator. In every new country you move to, you have your personal translator travels with you. So now you can communicate with people. Any backpacker can now do that. Now, if you're a translator, you might not like that, right? But if you're a person that wants translations, if you're a person who wants to, have an illustration on your little blog post, you couldn't have afforded a $400 Illustrator in the past. Now you can have some nice looking illustration for your blog post. So whenever you care about the outputs, you love it. Anyway, yeah, those are some lessons that I think will continue to be valid.
How about you, Bryan?
Well, I definitely echo that. Finding a good co-founder is crucial. Find someone. I was very lucky because we'd worked together for so long. Richard had experience before. People are asking me all the time how to find a good co-founder, and I guess I don't really know. I found mine a long time ago, but you should try because it makes a huge difference. And I think outside of that, fundamentals are absolutely crucial. I think especially early on, you can't really overestimate what people say in traditional startup circles around learning and quick iteration being vital and important. It's all about how much you learn and how quickly you're learning. But to go one layer deeper than that, I think one of the things that I've learned has been that in order to do that really effectively, you have to follow your intuitions and you have to follow your convictions as if they're 100% true, even if you have doubts, in order to learn as effectively as possible whether they actually are true. So I think those intuitions and convictions, just follow that as much as possible. And then don't let anything get in your way of learning.
You have a big intuition about something, believe in it, but go validate it, go bring it into existence, but also be open to being objective if it invalidates or, so how do you draw that line, right? Because I think this is where a lot of founders get messed up. They take it too far, even when the customers, the world, the investors are telling them no. And when do you know when they're right or when you're right, right? This is this fine line.
I don't know that you can know ahead of time. But if anything, I would lean harder into forcing them to show you you're wrong. And why do I say, especially in the early stages? Because there were two points in U.com's history that were particularly hard for me and Richard. I think as scientific, we have scientific backgrounds, right? So in many cases, we are very data driven. We want to run experiments. We want to let the data show us. We have our convictions, but then we want to be told by the world what is actually right or wrong so we can change our model. And there was one point where we were running A/B tests around whether we should truly, fully switch over to a chat-based interface or keep the search-based interface around. Now, in hindsight, that seems like an obvious question, but if you talk to a lot of people in the space, if you talk to investors, or is it, well, is this whole chat thing, is that going to be, is that a fad? Like, what's going on? And, you run A/B tests because you want to learn. 50-50. Every time, 50-50. You have 50% of the users saying, oh, I like this the old way, 50% saying, I like it the new way. And so when you get into those situations, what do? Then you kind of have to rely on your intuitions and your convictions, because no one's telling you what to do. And at the end of the day, that's part of what being the founder is about too. Like, you're founding because you're taking a huge risk going in that direction. And like I said before, you're only really going to find out, and you're only going to learn and tune your own intuitions if you test your intuitions. So you got to push them as hard as possible until you're sure they're wrong. That's when you've learned. If there's any doubt in your mind, oh, what if I would have done this or that? Then you don't get to absorb the lesson fully. You also discount the lesson. Your brain won't fully update. So you got to go all the way. Happens again, when we started shifting more and more towards enterprise and B2B use cases. Of course, we have tons and tons of users asking constantly for consumer-like features. How do you say no to that? Most of the world is telling you go in one direction, but you have to go in a different direction because of your own intuitions and convictions. And a lot of times it's delayed when you get that validated feedback. And it's just a risk. It's a pure risk in many ways.
So I got to say, Richard, Bryan, this was an incredible episode. I really, really enjoyed the conversation with you. I want to thank you both for joining. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Agentic. If you found it valuable, share it with a friend, like it, subscribe so you never miss out on another episode of what's happening in AI. We have some really interesting episodes coming up that were just recorded and are recording that I think you guys are going to get a lot of value out of. So if you're an AI founder that's currently raising or planning to raise, we'd love to hear from you. You can find our founder forum in the show notes. We're actively investing. And until next time, keep reaching your untapped potential. So I got to say, Richard, Bryan, this was an incredible episode. I really, really enjoyed the conversation with you. I want to thank you both for joining. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Agentic. If you found it valuable, share it with a friend, like it, subscribe so you never miss out on another episode of what's happening in AI. We have some really interesting episodes coming up that were just recorded and are recording that I think you guys are going to get a lot of value out of. So if you're an AI founder that's currently raising or planning to raise, we'd love to hear from you. You can find our founder forum in the show notes. We're actively investing. And until next time, keep reaching your untapped potential.